and visual artist currently based out of Hamilton. The character of Nico grew out of the 2015 London Fringe play called The Library. Her shows are filled with color, emotion, and catchy sound bites from films and TV shows, weaving theatrical narratives through costume, makeup, performance, and music. Along with being a regular entertainer on stages across Southern Ontario, Nico has also starred in the short comedy horror film Nico Lives and has been featured in various music videos. So we're really excited to hear the talk. We have no idea we haven't been given any previews, so we're really excited. Also, we just wanted to go do some quick basics on Zoom. So keep your mic muted if you can while Nico is presenting. And then questions will be at the end. And yeah, that should be everything. Anything else you want to add, Shannon? Sweet. And we'll hand it off to Nico.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nico Lavender. Thanks for joining. And thanks for Good Talks, or to Good Sport for inviting me to this series. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about just all kinds of things to do with drag and how it relates to things like imposter syndrome and self-confidence and anxiety and just a lot of things that I've dealt with and I feel like a lot of people deal with regularly. So here we go. Feeling the fantasy on the power of drag and overcoming imposter syndrome. So what is drag? Now that is a massive question and I feel like I could spend the entirety of this talk just like talking about it and never come up with a definition. And I feel like trying to define drag in the first place is a bit of a silly task because I feel like as soon as you try and say that it is one thing, then you can come up with an example of what it is not. Like there's a lot of things that people associate with drag, and you know, if you like Google image search drag queen or drag king, there's a bunch of kind of aesthetic associations that you have, but everyone has their own version of it. And basically I just kind of define it as dressing up, putting on a persona, and performing or presenting yourself in some kind of way. And that's a really broad and kind of like basic definition of it, but I feel like as soon as you try to define it, it kind of slips away from you. So, okay. So Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. So I feel like if all the world is a stage, then drag performers are kind of like renegade actors who purposely break the fourth wall and kind of point out the scenery and the set piece and the fact that everyone is playing a role and the fact that it is a big stage. And that by kind of switching roles and playing different personas, you're just kind of illustrating how everyone does that in their everyday life. Kind of like how this quote is directed, that everyone's kind of playing a part, whether you're going to work or on a date or whatever, you're just presenting yourself in a certain way. And the power of drag is to really point out that part of reality and kind of point to how silly categories can be, which I think makes it a really essentially queer art form as well, is that it really defies definition and defies putting things in categories, because you say, as soon as you think I'm one thing, I'm gonna turn around and come out and do a number dressed as something completely different or presenting a completely different fantasy, as it were. Drag is for everyone. So I feel like there's a lot of conceptions about drag that it's just for like cisgendered gay men. And there's a lot of kind of like mainstream pushing of that idea, but a lot of the history of drag and the most interesting things that come from it really come from a wide diversity of genders and and all types of people that do it. Yeah. So to me, drag is really, it's kind of like theater on your own time. So it's like you get to come up with a whole fantasy, so to speak. Like you get to be your own director, makeup artist, sound designer, whatever you want to throw into that. If you want to be your own musician or costume designer or whatever. I feel like drag is kind of like a plate that you can serve whatever you want to onto that. And that's what I like most about it, that it's just a medium for self-expression, however you want to do that. Okay, so let's talk about imposter syndrome. So, a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. Imposters suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override our feelings of success or external proof of their competence. I feel like it's a fairly more well-known idea now. I think a lot of people know about this concept, and I've always felt this very acutely just in life and basically everything I do. I feel like it's kind of a bit of the queer experience to begin with, is to just kind of feel like you don't fit in, or like you're an imposter in certain spaces. So the way that drag can help you deal with imposter syndrome, or at least the way it's helped me, is, to me, imposter syndrome, the ultimate thing is that it's about self-doubt, and it's about yourself kind of telling yourself you don't belong there, and that you aren't good enough at what you're about to do. And the best remedy that I found for that, and it's way easier said than done, is to just do the thing. And I feel like drag really helps with that, especially because it's kind of like, for me anyway, a live performance medium. So I can freak out as much as I want about something, but if I commit to like a date, and if I have a gig to do, it's like the time comes and you just have to go to the gig. There's no putting it off or whatever. And once you force yourself to get on that stage, every time I've done it, I've had so many doubts, but as soon as I'm on the stage, it's like magic. And it kind of fits into this other idea about power posing, which I think I heard about originally in like some sort of job interview seminar. But basically the idea is using kind of your body's physicality to convince yourself that you're confident or whatever. So you'll, do like this, or just like really powerful poses and stances in the mirror before you go and try and deliver that powerful stance to the world. So I feel like drag is kind of, you're just doing that. It's like kind of forcing you to do that. It kind of brings on sort of like a delusional self-confidence. It's like, if you can convince yourself that you're doing the thing, or that you belong in the place, then everybody else is going to believe it. And I feel like that's kind of the essential part about selling a fantasy, is that it's an internal thing first. And then once you do that, it's kind of like a repeating cycle. Like if you can present yourself in a way that you've never felt confident before, and people not only accept but encourage it, then it feeds back into this idea in yourself, and then you can keep going with it. Yes, this concept I like to call selling the garment. So it's kind of like a fashion show. And over time, I've learned there's a lot of things about drag and persona and confidence that I've come into by just doing it for the last 5 years. But a lot of it has been me trying to learn to take that from the stage into just regular life. So trying to do that and have that kind of self-confidence and access those ideas when I'm not on stage. And I talked about a little bit about this before, but a lot of the problem I've had with a lot of kind of artistic practice, and especially before I started doing drag, when I would work on music or visual art, I would be very much a perfectionist, and not in a good way. Like I would just keep working on something and keep finding flaws with it. And I still have that problem, but I feel like having having a deadline and a persistent idea and constantly moving forward with it has just helped me with that over time. Like I can be working on my face and there can be as many imperfections as I want, but if the gig is in half an hour and it's down the street, like I just have to throw on a wig and throw on my costume and get going. I can't worry about the perfections. And it turns out I'm the only one who cares about them at the end of the day, a lot of the times. So it just forces you to do it and not worry about all the kind of imperfections. Because I think drag in its essence is a very kind of imperfect thing. Like there's always a little bit of crunch to it, for lack of a better term. At least I think the best drag always has a little nod to the fact that what you're watching isn't real or isn't what you think it is. Okay, so there's a lot of ironies in drag that I found, like the concept of there's so much about it that's about imitation. So whether you're doing a celebrity impersonation or you're lip syncing a song where you're pretending that someone else's singing is coming out of your mouth, a lot of it is about imitation and about kind of remixing things. And it's kind of ironic that by doing that, you somehow learn a lot about yourself and a lot about kind of how to remix those things in an original way. So it's this kind of constant push and pull between embodying other personas and constantly switching that up and being able to explore that in an environment where you don't feel limitations about it really teaches you, or it taught me at least, a lot about who I really am. And I've always found that really kind of funny and ironic. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about my process of putting together a number. So most of my performances tend to be like a lip sync performance, which is pretty standard for drag. And a lot of that has to do with, I like to think of it as if I'm in a kitchen and I'm making a recipe, and each ingredient is kind of like a pop culture reference. So that could be the song, or it could be a spoken word segment. And by mixing them up, you kind of come up with a completely different thing in the end. So an example of that would be, I was doing this number for a little bit around the holiday season. I'll probably do it around this holiday season too, because it's just fun. So it starts off and I have a carton of eggnog. And it starts off with a lip sync spoken word performance that I got from YouTube of this girl who's just like obsessed with eggnog and just talking about how much she loves it. And then it cuts into Toxic by Britney Spears. And most of the places that I do it, like everybody knows that instrumental of Toxic when it comes on, that string hit. And it makes the joke immediate because everyone knows all of the ingredients and what the references are. And then I go on throughout the song to chug eggnog and mime, getting sick and everything. And then I'm like hurting by the end. So it's kind of like you can take two things or more things, as many things as you want, and change them into something completely different. And I've always been really interested in that kind of remix culture and the idea of, I feel like it's kind of a cliche, but the whole nothing is original idea. And the only way to kind of do original things for me is to like remix them in a way that is original, or to take things that have already been done and reinterpret them to represent something completely different. And a lot of my numbers that I put together, I like to think of as like a little mini one-act play. So I like to tell a story through the music, and the way I develop a lot of things in terms of ideas is when I'm listening to a song, I'll think about that concept and about that story. And then it's all about constructing that through costume and through character embodiment, but also through creating like DIY props or having specific lighting segments that you do. One thing that I love about drag is that it, like I said before, it allows you to be kind of all these different facets of something. So you can really get into putting together a number that sells a complete fantasy, or as much of a fantasy as you want to. Yes, I already talked about these things. And another big part of a lot of my performances, I find, and it's kind of funny, I never realized it until people brought it up to me that I was doing it so constantly, is that a lot of my performances end up being very kind of destructive or messy, like taking apart parts of my costume, reveal, or taking off my makeup, taking off a wig. And I feel like I was kind of unintentionally doing that because of this idea of drag that I have, that it is always kind of a nod to it not being real, and to the facade of it all, and the makeup of it all, the armor that you put on. Okay. Yeah, I feel like I had more to say, but I'm not really sure. Speaking of imposter syndrome, the reason I came up with that kind of idea for this talk in that direction was even the way I was feeling about when I was asked to do the talk. It was that immediate kind of imposter syndrome of like, oh, it's an artist talk. I've never done something like that. I'm not, a legitimate artist, which I know is BS, because of course I believe that drag is an art form and everything, but that just gave me the idea to talk about that. And I think one of the biggest things about anxiety and imposter syndrome for me is that it's not like a dragon that you slay entirely ever. It's constantly a thing that comes back. But if you have these ideas about it, and if you can kind of convince yourself and know how to convince yourself that you are that bitch, for lack of a better term, sorry, I don't know if I can swear, then yeah, I think that's the essential thing, is like equipping yourself with like that kind of magic potion of almost delusional self-confidence, which seems kind of weird, but once you believe it so intensely, it's hard for other people to really not believe it. So yeah. That is the end of that chapter.
Thank you, Nico. I guess we'll just do questions now. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Yes, Zane Pate.
What was like your first show like? How did that go? Like, I'm sure it was messy, like you were talking about how most drag can get messy, but like, were you immediately wanting to get right back on the stage the next day, or were you like, I gotta go back to the drawing board, or like how did it go? Like,
yeah, I would say probably like all the above. So my first performance was, I think I mentioned it a little bit in the bio, but it kind of grew out of this Fringe production that I was a part of called The Library, which just kind of involved a lot of gender swapping and queer explorations and drag. And then, so my first performance was actually the closing party for that. I got in drag, and then we had like a band, and then I opened for them. And it was definitely messy. It was definitely very crunchy. I have pictures from that night that I want no one to see. But I definitely wanted to do it like immediately again. And a big part of that, I think, was the environment that I was in and the encouragement that I got from the people that I was around, that it was like not only okay, but like a cool thing, and that I should keep going with it. Like all the people that I was in the play with and that just kind of came to the party had said that this is something I should keep doing. So I just kind of kept doing it that way. And the way I started out was a little bit funny, because I feel like for a lot of drag performers, performing in like a gay bar is just kind of the quintessential place. But I'd say for the first like almost a year, I didn't really perform in a club. The first one was in this basement of a thrift store, and then I was performing at like house shows and like Call the Office and like different open mics, and kind of the things that I had been a part of already and kind of knew more about. And it wasn't later until I got into the more kind of nightclub scene of it all.
Do you have like drag family? Can you talk about that if you do?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have like drag family in the way that a lot of people think about it or do. I have a lot of drag performers that I kind of came up with and that I'm very close with. I guess you could say I have a lot of sisters, but no mother. And the way I learned was very from scratch. Like I didn't really have, later on I had older queens that I could look up to and ask advice from and everything. But when I first started, it was very much just me on my own. I'd never done makeup before even. So a lot of like YouTube.
Is that my computer or is that Nico?
I think it's Nico's end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think they're frozen.
Can we check Facebook maybe?
Can we just wait a minute?
Yeah, I think it'll probably resolve itself.
Nico is finished.
Talk over.
That was it.
Hello. Muted, there we go.
Okay.
All good. You just cut out a little bit at the end there.
Okay.
You were saying you learned on YouTube mostly?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so I would say that YouTube is my drag mother, but the sisterhood kind of thing is very important to me. And I was saying that I think there's a lot of kind of misconceptions about drag performers and that they're very kind of catty or don't get along with each other very well. But I found, even if people kind of play and act on stage, that like backstage is very tight knit, and that if you're performing with people, it's very much everything for the show. It's kind of like being in some sort of other theater troupe where you're essentially working together to present one thing, even though you're all doing your own separate things. So that element of drag family has been very important to me.
Awesome. I have another question if nobody else does. My question is, were there queens you looked up to when you first started? And what are the queens you look up to now? Like, are any still the same? Have they really changed?
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't really seen a lot of like local drag or like personal drag, but there were a couple queens that I did look up to. One performer, Red Moon, I don't know if they still perform anymore, but much more of just like a androgynous kind of more club kid inspired performances. And before I started doing drag, a lot of my inspiration came from seeing people perform at Gen Pop, which was this event that happened in London for a while, this kind of like alternative queer event that they had at like APK and Call the Office for years. And it actually like just ended basically when I started doing drag. But I really looked up to a lot of those people. And there were even a bunch of people who I can't even remember like their names or who they were really, but just people that I saw around. Yeah, and then there's obviously like online on Instagram and everything, there's endless amounts of inspiration, especially for makeup. And yeah, I think the queens I look up to most now are probably just the ones I've seen working in the community for a really long time. So like in London, Miss Aphrodite or Katu has just been out there like grinding and raising money for charities for years upon years, and I just really respect her for that. So
Awesome. Do you have any emotions like around mainstream drag? Like, how do you feel about Drag Race and all that jazz?
Yeah, I have lots to say about it. It's a really like, it's an interesting thing. I'm very much two minds about it. On one hand, I think that like it's provided a lot of exposure and a lot of opportunities. I don't think I would have got to do probably half the stuff that I've done without it being as mainstream because of things like Drag Race. But at the same time, I think it does present an image of drag that gives people kind of a skewed idea of what it actually is on a local level. It's really kind of pushed the polish level and budget of drag and the expectations of a lot of people very high, to a degree that like a lot of local drag performers, they're not getting their stuff designed they're not investing as much as people do on Drag Race. So I think it's done really good things, but it's also done some not so great things. But I think overall it's had a positive influence, even just of kind of exposure of drag and queer stories, like, and how far that can penetrate with that kind of mainstream appeal, that there's a ton of young people that had been introduced to the art form that never would have known about it or wouldn't have known about it for so much longer. Like if Drag Race had been around when I was much younger, maybe I would have started doing drag sooner. So I don't know, it's kind of push and pull.
Nice. Do you have any specific goals you have in mind for like performances or anything like that?
Well, right now it's obviously a little bit challenging and different for performers everywhere and performance-based arts everywhere. But just in terms of general goals, there's a lot of projects I think that that I'm interested in doing that can be kind of channeled through drag, mostly like musical projects. So I've had, and I remember doing a bit of this stuff in drag when I first started, but kind of like an act, an electronic music act. So I really want to start doing more of that. And I feel like that's something that's good to develop when there's not a lot of performing going on. It's a good time to get in the kitchen and cook up.
Sure.
Do you find that because you're not performing as much, like this idea of like kind of being an imposter, like have you had to combat that in different aspects of your life now?
Yeah, I feel like since I'm not performing, it's funny that you bring that up, but since I'm not performing, I've felt a lot of those feelings much more acutely. And I feel like the influence of social media, while it can be a good thing, I think it has like a double-edged sword. And I feel like when you're not doing things like a lot of people aren't doing right now during the pandemic, seeing other people just even doing anything, it feels like you're kind of like you're not doing enough, and it brings on a lot of these kind of imposter-like feelings. But I never really connected that to the fact that I'm not performing. And I think that kind of arms me against that type of thing. And I can convince myself that I'm doing whatever I want, really. So yeah, I think it has been, and I feel like I'm probably not alone in that, that this time has brought on a lot of different anxieties, but specifically to do with not producing enough or not being successful enough. So yeah.
I messaged you after our last talk before we set this up that you were one of the people that kind of like basically inspired good talks in general. And me and Steve were eating at Kenzo and like the little Japanese place on Dundas. And I think it like just opened or something. And you were doing your stilt performance down the street. And I don't like, how did you think of that? Or like, did you see that somewhere else? Like, I've never seen someone mix stilts and like drag or like anything really. Like, I guess it makes sense because it's like clown and, you know, like kind of circus performing stuff kind of goes well together. Like, and like, do you want to speak on more on just kind of like, I guess your thoughts on that? I thought it was even a question.
For sure. Yeah, like, first of all, thanks for sending that message. It was very nice of you. Yeah, oh man, I miss Dundas Street and Kenzo. I used to live like upstairs, basically. So like where I was, this performance that you're talking about, the stilts one, was it was a part of the Nuit Blanche, one of the years that I don't know if they're like still doing that in London now, or obviously not this year. And the way I thought of that, I wish it was more of an original idea, but I kind of adapted it from a favorite musician and artist of mine, Amanda Palmer, because I was reading her book called The Art of Asking, I think. And she's talking about being a street performer in Boston, I think, and how she had this like, she would stand on, I think, like a milk crate or something, and then had like an extra long dress, so it would make her look really tall. And that's where I got the idea to do that. But I wanted to make it kind of like comically tall. And I wish I knew how to use stilts, but I don't. So I wasn't actually on stilts. I was on like this really tall stool. And then I got like a whole bunch of wedding dresses, these secondhand wedding dresses, and then built like a skirt on the stool basically, and then an extra long wedding dress on top of that. So it just all flowed down and I was standing. So then I ended up being like 9 or 10 feet tall or something like that. Yeah, and I guess the whole concept of that was that I was like a jilted bride who would have her heart broken. I would give people flowers, but I couldn't speak. I was like a mute bride. But yeah, I don't know, that's something I'd really like to get back to. There's a lot of, that's part of what I enjoy most about drag, is like taking it into different spaces and different like elements, rather than just where people expect to see drag all the time, which is usually in like a nightclub or whatever. And yeah, I've always been really interested in street performing, and I'd like to get more into it. Well, I don't know, actually, maybe right now might not be that bad of a time to do that type of thing. You can't really interact with people as much, but you can be like a standalone little art project on the street. So yeah, giving me ideas.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, this whole thing is kind of making us like get out of our comfort zones, learning like technology that we've had for 20 years, but we never actually got around to use. Like we've been able to do this since like Skype and stuff like that, but we never bothered like utilizing it. So it's kind of a good thing in that we're like pushing ourselves and connecting in other ways. So like you could always do like skits or like I don't even know like you know what I mean? Like there's like you said, online or street performing and that kind of thing. It's just kind of like we're adaptable, right? Like
yeah, like even doing like more video stuff. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying during like the main thing of the talk, but like I feel like limitations and kind of deadlines are a really essential thing for me in my practice, and that this coronavirus and the pandemic it's just another one of those kind of limitations that can actually force you into doing something you never would have thought of. So there are a lot of interesting opportunities. Anyone else have questions?
Don't think so. Thank you for answering all of ours, though.
Yeah, no problem.
So I think we share everything online, so people can follow you if they want to there. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Shannon, Zane.
Yep.
Right.
If no one has any other questions, then thank you, Nico, for your talk, and thank you everyone else for being here as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.